Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guests, Tobias Buckell and Dave Klecha, talking about their new novel, The Runes of Engagement. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Worldshapers, the podcast where I talk to other authors about their latest books. My name is Edward Willett. I am myself an author of science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction for readers of all ages. A lot of books at this point. I've lost count of the exact number. My most recent novel was The Tangled Stars, which is a far future outer space science fiction adventure published by Daw Books, an ebook and audiobook back in fall of 2022. It's available everywhere, and it's humorous. It features an AI-uplifted talking cat who becomes a starship captain. It's a bit of a heist novel as well. I do hope to write a sequel eventually, but at the moment, that's my latest book, and you can, as I said, find it everywhere. One reason I haven't had a novel more recently than that is because of the publishing company I run, Shadowpaw Press, which I often liken the publishing business to like this fire hose of stuff that's coming at you all the time. I've published a lot of books, a lot of science fiction and fantasy, though not exclusively. I wanted to mention some of the most recent ones. First of all, it's not a trilogy. It is 3 books, but it's not a trilogy. They're in the same set, but they're not really related to each other, except that they're all by Arthur Slade, a Governor General's award-winning author from right here in Saskatchewan. The first one is Return of the Gredstone Ghosts, which is set in Moose Jaw. The second one is that's the back of it. That's better. Ghost Hotel, which is set in Saskatoon. And the third one is Invasion of the IQ Snatchers, which is set in Nanaimo, BC. And Art actually wrote them because he wanted to set stories in some of these interesting places. I highly recommend them. They're very funny. They're middle grade books, and their front covers are by Elaine M. Will, who's also from Saskatchewan. She's a Schuster Award-winning artist here in Saskatchewan. As you can see, she has kind of a comics graphic novel kind of artist. One other one I wanted to mention that came out very recently. It's kind of my biggest recent release, my biggest release ever, actually. And it's this one, Robert J. Sawyer's novel, The Downloaded, his latest novel. Of course, he's a Hugo Nebula award-winning author. He's also Canadian. I've known him for a long time. This came out as an audiobook originally with Brendan Fraser in the cast, among other luminaries. And then when the print rights became available, they came to me, and this is now available everywhere in print through Shadowpaw Press. It's also an ebook directly through Rob Sawyer. He kept the ebook rights, but I have the print rights, so if you want the print book, here it is. And then the other one I really wanted to mention, which came out earlier this year, because it ties in directly to the podcast, is Shapers of Worlds Volume 4. I have kickstarted 5 of these now. This is the most recent one to come out. The 5th one is in the works and will be out next winter. And these feature authors who were guests of the podcast. Some really big name authors in here, and I'm in there too. So I hope you'll check that out. It's also illustrated by Calgary artist Wendy Nordell, as will Volume 5 when it comes out next year will also be illustrated. So check that out as well. All right, well, that's the introductory stuff. Now, let's get to our guests for the day. As I cast around for there they are, my reading glasses. Much better. So, today's guests are Tobias S. Buckell and Dave Klecha. And Tobias S. Buckell is a New York Times bestselling writer and World Fantasy Award winner. He was born in the Caribbean, grew up in Grenada, and has lived in the British and U.S. Virgin Islands. He is the author of the popular Xeno Wealth series, Crystal Rain, along with other standalone novels, and almost 100 stories. His latest novel, besides this one, is A Stranger in the Citadel. Buckell lives in Bluffton, Ohio. And his co-author is Dave Klecha. Born in Detroit, studied Russian and history in college. He then joined the U.S. Marine Corps Reserves. In addition to writing, Dave engages in a number of other creative pursuits, including acting, set building, script writing, and extreme amateur landscaping. His fiction has appeared in the Subterranean Press magazine, Clark's World, and various anthologies, and he lives in Rochester, Michigan. And we're going to be talking about their new joint novel, The Runes of Engagement. So, let's talk to Tobias and Dave now. Tobias and Dave, welcome to the Worldshapers.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
I guess. Sorry. Old habits.
This is a little unusual. I have done, I think, maybe only 2 in the 170-some interviews I've done since I started the Worldshapers, where I did two people at once. So, and this will be exciting. But I'm still going to start the same way I always do, which is since I'm a musical theater guy, I usually say, let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start. Let's start with Tobias first, I guess, and tell me about yourself and how you got into the writing biz, and then we'll, Dave, get you to do the same thing.
Well, hi, I'm Tobias Buckell. I'm a Caribbean-born science fiction fantasy author. I've been publishing short stories since 1999, so 150 or so of those have been lucky enough to be in magazines and anthologies in general, and 15 or 16 or so novels have come out. I started out writing really young. I started submitting short stories in seventh grade to anthologies and to Analog magazine, which meant that I was a little bit overambitious there, but eventually started selling when I was about 19 or 20. So I've been publishing short stories since I was 19 years old, and I've been lucky enough to still be in the game. So they still keep having me back for another round.
You probably collected your share of rejection slips in those early years.
I have a career rejection count of well over 750. I think I'm closing in on 800.
Oh, you keep
I'm
track.
actually redoing my whole database right now, so moving it to a flat file database using text files. So it's taking a little while, but I'll be able to revive the long dead spreadsheet that I've not been keeping up to date for the last 5 years.
I think somewhere in my storeroom there's a box full of old rejection slips that I've kept over the years. I haven't looked at them in years either, so
I've got this
I knew there were
huge
lots.
folder that I take into my creative writing class when I talk about rejection and submission that has about 200 or 300 paper from the old days when we didn't get emailed instantly rejections. You'd have to wait to go to the mailbox and open it up, and
you had to
open
wait
up
to
the
be
envelope,
rejected
and you
instead
didn't
of
know
instant
whether it was a
gratification.
rejection or not.
Yeah.
So I have all those in a binder that I show students just to show just the sheer volume of no that you get when you're starting out as a writer.
And Dave, what about you? Tell me your life story in a very brief amount of time.
My whole life story, yeah. Born and raised Metro Detroit, northeast side of Detroit. Started writing early as well. Actually submitted my first novel when I was 17 to Bain. Summarily rejected, but and rightly so. Kind of took a break for a little while, and have done the suburban dad thing. I was in the Marines for 6 years, got back into writing pretty seriously after the Marines. Ended up co-writing some stuff with Tobias, some short stories, and then I've been putting more effort into it. I'm a supply chain management consultant by day, so that's how I keep the lights on. And still live in the Metro Detroit area.
So how did the two of you come together? You said you'd been collaborating on short stories before this book came along. Mm-hmm. How did that all happen?
Dave, you want to take it?
Yeah, so Tobias and I met in 2001. We were introduced by a mutual friend, Charles Coleman Finley, at Confusion, which is a long-running Detroit area, small literary-focused science fiction convention. Has been going since 1976, I think. I should know that. I actually sit on their board right now. So we met there, have been friends ever since. But then, around 2010 or so, I think, Tobias approached me and he was like, I've had an invite from John Joseph Adams to submit to an anthology, and it's kind of up your alley in terms of military action. And would you want to write something with me for it? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? That sounds like fun. I'm also a theater guy, so I come from a background of collaboration as well. So, like, for me, collaborating is actually an almost more natural way of going about stuff. So, so that was how we got started. We threw together a couple other short stories over the years. initially there was also the back when SIF was Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, when their admission rules were a little more stringent. We were trying to get me over the threshold to get in. Since then, it's gotten a little more relaxed, but yeah, that was also part of the rationale at the time. And then and then we wrote the Rules of Enchantment, which was the short story that actually opens the Runes of Engagement in a modified form, and then kept on from there, basically.
Well, the next obvious question is the one you're never supposed to ask, which is, where do you get your ideas? So let's just say, what was the seed from which the Rules of Engagement grew then?
Well, that was really interesting because, I mean, one, the raw seed was John Joseph Adams approaching us, and saying, I'd like a military fantasy short story, and then we have to do the author's work, which is, what does that look like for us, right? And trying to think about what do we have to offer, and what we had to offer is one, Dave is a Marine, so sometimes when you're tight on time, you're thinking about what are all the tools I already have available with me that I'm going to work on this short story with, not what's something I'd like to try that I've never tried before, because when you've got a commission and it's due, that's not the time to be too clever, right? So we're like, okay, what do we have in terms of raw experience here, right? Dave's a Marine. We both love fantasy. We both talk endlessly about world building mistakes. We both talk about frustrations we have with some of those world building mistakes. The way in which military adventure is portrayed in genre sometimes is something we've talked a lot about. So out of all of that, I knew there was a lot of really good grist that we could grab a hold of really easily inside of our domain knowledge. And so that kind of where we went hunting for ideas. And out of that came kind of the rough idea of having fun with this, the idea of Marines, as Dave has all the expertise about, go into Fantasyland, which we both have tons of expertise about, like generic Fantasyland. And also, we're both huge fans of a book called The Tough Guide to Fantasyland by Diana Wynne Jones.
Oh, yes. It's right over here somewhere.
Yeah. It's one of those foundational texts, like when you're trying to better your world building for classic fantasy, you read that to see what not to do. And we kind of thought, what if we take that as a guide of everything to do?
Right. Right.
Yeah, I use that book when I've done like writer in residence and stuff like that, and I have run into fantasy writers, which I often do because they know who I am. That's the kind of stuff I will look at. I usually say, you should read that.
Yeah. Well, it's the one of the things that we also addressed in the text even was like, kind of, where do these stories come from and why are they tropes? Why are they, where did this come from? And so that's kind of one of the underlying aspects of it is like, this is where it came from. This is why this is a thing, kind of.
Yeah. The other thing is that we've had so many conversations with each other about our frustrations about characters who are completely and utterly genre unaware. Right. It's as Dave points out quite often, it's just sort of like, how many zombie movies do we have to suffer through where everyone spends a third of the movie being like, what are even these things that are running towards us that only seem to die if shot in the head? What's a name for them? What could we call this? What kinds of behaviors might they exhibit? And it's always like, after a certain point, the utter ignorance of all zombie knowledge sort of breaks your suspension of disbelief as a watcher, And so we thought, what if these are our people? What if they're completely like watching all of the movies and playing D&D and aware of all of the tropes, and they're being dumped into this? Like, how much fun would that be?
Yeah, I've often, you're watching shows and it's like, you're apparently watching a world in which these kinds of shows that you're watching do not exist, even though it looks like our show. It's always kind of that, I guess it's a form of world building where you just erase the parts that you don't want to be in the world so that your characters can encounter them for the first time. Well, we should probably at this point have some sort of synopsis of the book and the short story that began it.
So the short story it was very, very basic. It was a simple, it was an escort quest, to put it in the video game language. The Marines go and they pick up They pick up a VIP, and they are to escort her back to base. And they get chased down by some trolls, some big, huge, lumbering trolls, and they have to make do with their limited resources. Just as a Marine rifle squad, so 13-ish Marines and a Navy corpsman. And yeah, that's what they just have to get by with what they're carrying in order to make it back to base. And so that was the kind of the genesis. And then again, that starts off the story. And then the remainder, what became the novel then, is a story of okay, what happens after that when other forces come for the very important person, very important princess in force, and these Marines end up being sequestered with her off in Fantasyland on their own, cut off from home, and have to try to get her to safety. And then that all evolves into something else.
So how did your Marines end up in Fantasyland?
Well, this is, I mean, it's a portal fantasy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So portals appear, and out of it come all of these creatures of legend, causing havoc and chaos, and they're pushed back through. But this novel kind of starts when, after the incident, after that, and they're pushing back into the other side to figure out where did all this come from, and can we stop it? And can you please stop? Can you leave Central Park alone?
Right.
Can the trolls not be smashing the Empire State Building and bringing it down? Like it's in poor taste. So the other thing that was interesting about this is that it, and Dave pointed this out, is that it allowed us to kind of sever the Marines from the usual supply chain.
Yeah, I was
that
wondering
they're
about
part
that.
of. And it firmly puts them into the kind of like Rangers stuck in a hostile environment in Fantasyland, right? There's no ability to call an airstrike. There's no ability to get choppered out. It's just, it's that classic kind of fantasy thing where it's like, well, we have to go from this point to this point, and everyone in between hates us, and go.
I presume ammo becomes an issue, and they run low on
Oh,
all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
All of that.
Yep.
So
I think at one point Dave was complaining because he was like, I have a rough idea of how much has been fired, but like I'm starting to get worried about whether anyone's going to start like
counting.
getting back to us on like individual counts,
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
but like we tried to take all of that into account.
Yeah, we did, and try to make it as far as that goes, as grounded as possible, because I think that then that highlights how ungrounded the whole rest of it is.
It is, as one review said, I think Publishers Weekly said, surprisingly sometimes gritty, but not in kind of like that grimdark way, but I think gritty in terms of like we just get into those details, right? Of like how this all works and what these individuals have to be paying attention to and thinking about.
So what was the planning process? I mean, you had the short story, but then you decided, well, first of all, why did you decide to make the novel? And what was your planning process? There's two of you. And are you both like, do you do a detailed outline going back and forth, or do you write one chapter and throw it at the other person, or how does it work for you?
Oh, for this one, do you mind if I take the run on this one, Dave? For this one, like we rented a hotel room in Detroit for 3 days, 3 nights, 3 days, 2 nights, something like that. An extended weekend. And basically took like a whiteboard and our laptops with us, and ordered room service, and basically just went at like a writer's room in Hollywood, pitching ideas to each other and building the structure of this in as much detail as we could come up with. And after that, Dave wrote a significant chunk of the zero draft, because I was on another deadline for a commissioned book at the time, with kind of like sending me like what he'd been writing as he was writing it. And then we had another 2-day weekend video planning session to plan out the last third of it, when we started kind of having some details that we wanted to kind of like flesh out. Then I took it and did a deep revision, like with all my notes as we, that I've been writing as we went along. Passed that back to Dave to make sure I hadn't broken anything, and which I had. There were some things that it was like, needed fixed. And so like we just kept passing it back and forth like that until we were like, I think we have a thing, right? Like it's interesting. It's spiky. It's interesting. It's fun. And started showing it to our agent. And so that was the process.
You wrote it before anybody had asked for it. It was like basically on spec.
Oh God, yeah. So that's a whole thing, right? Like no one asked for this. No one asked for this. The short story, we didn't get a lot. I think maybe one person reviewed the short story. Yeah. So I know Dave got some fan mail for it, but like I didn't get any fan mail for the story. No one was saying like, what the world needs is more of that short story.
More of this, yeah.
But we just believed in it. We loved it. Like we kept meeting each other after we wrote it and saying new jokes, right? Like, hey, what we could have done? We could have done this, and then Dave would have 3 more. Like, no, you idiot. Like there's so much more potential here than even that. And so the more we bounced off of each other, the more it was kind of like, I wasn't looking for another book project at the time. It was the furthest thing from my head, but it was just one of those things that just became inevitable, right? Like, I think one night, like we were chatting and we were making each other laugh by throwing out more, hey, we could have done this. That would have been funny. And suddenly we kind of like looked at each other and we're like, so yeah,
let's
do doing this?
Yeah. Yep.
Now, do each of you do you do the beta reader thing where you have other people read it before you submit it? I've never done that, but lots of people do.
No, I think that's the advantage of co-writing is kind of where we are our own beta readers and we each have our own strengths. And certainly Toby's got literal decades of publishing experience to fall back on. So
thanks for that.
I think I have more, so there you go.
Well, yeah, okay.
My beard just got a little wider.
Yeah, exactly. I'm older than you. Yeah,
I know. This has been it. This is why I never grew a beard in my 20s.
Oh, okay.
Because like the first time I tried, it came out with so much white in it. I was just like, and no.
I had to grow one to play Tevye in a production of Fiddler on the Roof, and the only times I've grown a beard have been to be in Fiddler on the Roof, and it didn't come in gray. But I had a bet with my wife, and she said that it would, and it didn't. So I won a bottle of champagne. But I'm quite sure if I grew one now, it would be Santa Claus. So.
Yeah. We were
sorry. I took things off track.
Okay. I had an answer and then I completely biffed it.
Beta readers, you're each other's beta readers.
Yeah. So. Well, then, and then we had our agent, and we actually did make a couple changes based on her feedback. She's very, very good at spotting structural stuff. Asking questions, being curious about the world and the story and stuff like that, and really being very thoughtful about it. So she kind of served that role in a way. But I mean, really, each other. We were each other's beta reader and able to pick up on things that we both missed. And I'm sure we have blind spots together, but I think they were certainly smaller.
And then you found a home for it with Tachyon.
Yes.
What was the editorial process like then after you got there? Was there a great deal of revision, or how did it work?
We fixed typos mainly, I think.
Yeah.
So that's not saying that like they weren't interested in doing work. That's just saying we revised this probably, I want to say by the time it got to Tachyon, it had been revised and passed 15 times at least.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I've lost track, but like I stopped counting after like 12.
Yeah.
So we've tightened every conceivable inch of this book so many times.
Well, it's not like the old days when you had a sheaf of paper with red marks on it, and that was one draft, and then you typed it again, because that's how far back I go. So it came out when?
It came out this month, so
This
just
month,
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I thought this was good timing.
Yeah, no, it's great timing. I'm sure our
Yep.
publicist is happy.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And have you had? Looks like there's been some good reviews. Are you pleased with the response that you've had from it?
I'm really surprised at the response it's had. So, like we wrote it to get each other to laugh, but like Library Journal gave it a star. I mean, Dave, like,
Right?
Guess you made them laugh too.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah,
That's
we've had really good responses. It's been really nice.
That's an interesting point, actually. Like Tobias, have you done a lot of humorous writing? Not humorous as in the bone, but
at short story, I seem to get a lot of reaction from readers when I'm in the satirical mode. So some of my best pieces have often been. So this is always this dilemma as a writer, and this is something that like it's hard to prepare people for, but like that drives me nuts as a creative, which is that like everyone, before you become a creative, before you get published, before lots of people see your work, basically you probably have gotten a message that the more time you spend on something, the better it is, right? It's just a linear expectation. You're in college and you turn in a paper and they're like, if you spent more time on this, it would be better. If you turn in a short story that has problems, you're probably told in a workshop, spend more time on it to make it better, right? There's this sort of idealization and valorization of artists who suffer to produce great work, right? And so forth. And we tend to be suspicious of artists who kind of dash off brilliant things, right? And it's a cultural thing, right? That this is artificial, right? Because like you have this like great story of like an emperor asks his court artist to draw the perfect bird, and the artist says, "Okay, I have to go up into the mountains to study this and think about it, and I'll be back with the perfect bird." And he leaves, and a week passes, a month passes, a quarter passes, a year passes, a decade passes, 25 years pass. And the artist comes back to court, an old man, and he sets up his easel in front of the emperor, and everyone's shocked to see. They all thought he was dead, and he pulls out his brush and he goes, and there it is. It's the perfect expression of a bird in one single line. And everyone gasps. And the emperor says, why didn't you just do that 25 years ago? And he goes, look, I had to go up into the hills and study birds and study the art of calligraphy until I learned, and I drew birds every day for hours a day for 25 years, and now I can whip out a perfect bird with just a line and a brush. That's what it takes to become this good at it, to draw the perfect bird. It's not the act of drawing, it's the years of work before, So you get taught here when I was coming up in the field that like you have to work really hard on something. But the truth is, and I'm ADHD, so I lost track of the question here, and I'm just hoping to circle back and land it. What was the original question?
Humor.
Humor.
Humor. So the maddening thing is that I have written some satirical and humorous pieces that are dashed off from my perspective of the craft, right? Something made me extremely mad, a concept, and I saw how to parody it or make it satire in a short story. And I wrote it, and it took me probably no more than a night. And I sent it out to see if someone else thought highly of it, and they publish it. And then like it gets me reader mail, or it gets attention, or people really like it, and it gets reprinted in the year's best. And I'm like, huh. But the story that I spent 3 weeks sweating over and bringing all of my craft knowledge to, that I have tweaked and tuned, and is just a sports car as far as I can tell, that's screaming, can go down like a lead balloon without a trace, right? There is no connection between the amount of work I put into a creative piece and the amount of effort, reward that comes back to me. I've written stuff I've just thrown myself into for months that has gotten crickets, and I've worked on for months that has gotten awards. There's stuff I've worked on for months that gets fantastic email and reader mail, and there's stuff I've worked on for months that, so there's all of the responses will happen regardless of how much work you put into it. and it drives you somewhat a little bit schizophrenic sometimes. So this is my first time trying a novel like this, but every time I've done it as a short story, people have really liked it. So I'm curious to see what happens next.
Yeah.
Dave,
That was a long answer. I'm so sorry.
that's okay. Dave, are you a naturally humorous writer?
I think so. There's certainly times where I have to, with the rest of the stuff that I've written over the years, I have to pull back on sometimes. Early formative influences were like Terry Pratchett and Douglas Adams. So having that in the back of one's head can make it really easy to try to make a joke or make something absurd. At the same time, I love celebrating the general absurdity of life as it is. And that's actually one of the approaches that we had. Somebody asked us if this was a fundamentally unserious book and story. And I was like, no, it's a fundamentally serious story. It's just that there are absurdities and there is humor to be had. And some of it comes from the incongruity. Tobias said, we have genre aware characters. We have characters who should know this stuff. And so they have expectations. And so then there's a certain amount of humor in either reinforcing or subverting their expectations. And meanwhile, to them, and as far as the story goes, it's all completely serious. But, there's humor to be found there. And that was actually very much my experience of the Marines in general as well. So there was a lot of humor to be found in a very serious setting, just from sheer absurdity.
Well, yeah, through my publishing company, Shadowpaw Press, a recent title is called The Good Soldier. It's by Nir Yaniv, and it's a military science fiction satire, I guess. It's like Starship Troopers, but it's not. And he was going on his own, because he's Israeli born, so he was going on his military background when he was in the IDF as a cook or something. I don't know. I wasn't a cook, but but a lot of that stuff found it in there. And it's just the fact that military life in general seems to lend itself to a certain amount of absurdity.
Yeah,
I have no experience in that, but from reading, that seems to be the case. So that said, is there going to be a sequel to this book?
Well, that depends on the listeners, man.
Would you like to write a sequel? Could there be a sequel?
I had so much fun. I would in a heartbeat, if it's feasible, in a heartbeat. It's really fun to work on projects where there's so much joy. This is the most joyful project I've been working on in a while. So it just that's a fun place to be. It's a fun place to be.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. If the readership is there, then absolutely, we're all about it. The setting and the environment lends itself to endless stories, really. So
yeah.
So definitely we could do at least one more.
We have a lot more jokes that we couldn't use in this book.
For sure.
Now, there's sometimes okay, I wrote a funny book and got some good reviews, but one of the reviews was that I was perhaps more in love with because it was kind of like that, in that it's set in the future, but at least there's one character that is aware of current science fiction and Star Trek and Star Wars and stuff like that. And a reviewer said that perhaps there were too many Star Trek and Star Wars jokes. Do you worry that you might be amusing yourself, but maybe not other people?
Not really. We are amusing ourselves, and we're readers, and we're players of video games, and I'm a player of Dungeons and Dragons, and we read fantasy novels, and we watch fantasy movies, and we get a kick out of it. And if we get a kick out of it, there's certainly going to be other people that get a kick out of it. There's certainly plenty of humorous and jokey type stuff in this space across media. Mm-hmm. So, as far as that goes, that there's certainly a market for it. Now, that said, not everything is going to land with everyone, and that's okay. There are people who are going to not find the humor in this. There are people that are not going to find this enjoyable.
You're a theater guy. There is a saying that sometimes you're doing a joke for just that one person sitting in the back row in the corner, and if you get that one laugh out there in the dark, it doesn't matter if everybody else went, what? Because it's still good.
And certainly I've been that audience member too. So yeah, that's all right. So yeah, I'm not concerned about that. Take it or leave it. If enough people like it, then they like it, and that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was kind of my reaction to the critic was, well, you didn't like it, but I know lots of people who did. So,
Yeah.
Sure.
And to be honest, it like Dave said, it was this was created without us really knowing whether it would find a place or whether it had a shot with audiences. We primarily wrote it because the two of us kind of felt it needed to exist. That's
ultimately,
it.
that's why we create anything, isn't it?
Right.
That's the human creative impulse.
Yeah, exactly.
What are each of you working on now that's not this?
I'm working on a weird revenge cyborg trapped on a fallen planet with not enough technology to get him home type novel called The Maroon that I've been enjoying. Kind of a bizarre revenge quest, Swiss Family Robinson of One type novel.
Okay. And Dave?
Yeah, I've got the current project is part of a sci-fi series that I've been working on for a while. Is not as militarily focused, but is hopefully just as grounded. But yeah, I've been working on that for a little while, trying to get some of it into shape and to hand it off to our agent and see what she can make of it.
And where can people keep up with? It's hard. You can't keep up with a book, really. I guess where they can keep up with each of you.
TobiasBuckell.com usually has stuff up on there, although I'm in the middle of redoing it. So FYI, if it looks strange, my bad. And I'm sometimes on Bluesky. I've got Tobias Buckell at Bluesky. I'm not on Twitter anymore, so if you see me on Twitter, it's a lie. And if you see me on Facebook, that's just a local account that I mainly use to keep track of garage sales in the local area. And I'm not usually on it very often, even though everyone gets excited when they figure out that it's me because I use a shorter version of my name on it. I was hoping to go anonymous, but then people tracked me down, started friending me on it, and I was like, no, I swear, it's only for local stuff, but okay, fine. Sometimes people try to contact you on it or whatnot.
Well, I won't put a link to it when I do the webpage for this. So.
Gratitude.
Yeah, I'm dave.klecha.net website, blog thing. It's got links to my socials, which is just Bluesky, Threads, and Instagram mainly. I like Toby. I'm on Facebook. In my case, it's not garage sales, it's theater, because all the local theater groups all use Facebook exclusively for announcements and planning and everything. And I really wish they'd do something different, but it's what they do. So there I am. But that's not a promotional avenue.
Yeah, I think that's true of our local theater groups too. They're almost not the professionals, but the community ones are.
Yep.
Facebook is where they live. So
drives me nuts as an audience member because I'm constantly finding out about cool shit that I'd like to do 2 days after it happened.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm still finding. I mean, thanks to the algorithm, I'm finding out about cool auditions I'd like to do 2 days after they happen.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Same thing.
Well, this, when it goes live, will be live immediately and current, and people will be able to hopefully buy the book and make you lots of money. So that would be good.
That'd be awesome.
So thanks.
I'll get rich and famous.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being on. I enjoyed the chat. I hope you did as well.
Thank you.
It was great. Thanks for having us.
Yep. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much to Tobias and Dave for that great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you will come back and enjoy many more great conversations as the Worldshapers continues. I have lots of great guests coming up, and you can find the Worldshapers online at theworldshapers.com. On the website, you'll find links to people's social media and book covers and more details and all that sort of thing. You can also find links to the audio-only version. The Worldshapers is also on X at The Worldshapers and on Facebook at The Worldshapers. You can find me personally at edwardwillett.com. You can find me on X at ewillett. You can find me on Facebook at edward.willett. You can find me on Instagram at edwardwillettauthor. You can find me on YouTube, obviously, at Edward Willett. And I have the distinct feeling I forgot something in there. Oh, well. Was it X? E-Willett? Maybe that was it. Anyway, you can find me in all those places and many others if you go looking for me. Shadowpaw Press, my publishing company, is at shadowpawpress.com. It's on X at Shadowpaw Press, and it's on Instagram at Shadowpaw Press, and Facebook at Shadowpaw Press. All right. I think that's it for now. So thanks so much for watching this episode of The Worldshapers, and I hope that you will continue to come back in the future as I continue to talk to authors about their latest books. That's it for today. Bye for now.